the day he stopped being strong for everyone. There comes an evening when strength feels like a costume you've worn too long. The fabric has grown heavy with tears you never shed, weighted down by all the times you said, "I'm fine," when your soul was screaming. Tonight you sit in the gathering darkness, and for the first time in years, you allow yourself to feel the exhaustion that lives in your bones. You remember being small, watching the adults around you carry burdens like badges of honor. Somewhere in those early years, you learned that love was earned through service, that worth was measured by how much you could carry for others. The child in you absorbed this lesson completely, weaving it into the very fabric of who you believed you had to be. The mask began forming then, layer by delicate layer. First came the smile that never faltered, even when your heart was breaking. Then the shoulders that never sagged, no matter how heavy the load. Your voice learned to speak comfort, while your spirit yearned to be comforted. You became a lighthouse for others, steady and bright, while your own inner landscape remained shrouded in fog. Years passed like pages turning in a book you never chose to read. You became the one everyone called in crisis, the rock upon which others built their stability. Your phone buzzed with desperate needs, your calendar filled with other people's emergencies. Somewhere in the constant giving, you lost track of your own desires, your own pain, your own longing for someone to ask how you were doing and wait for a real answer. The nights were the hardest. In the silence, after everyone else's needs had met, you would lie in bed feeling strangely empty, despite having given so much. There was a hollowness that no amount of helping others seemed to fill. You began to wonder if this was all there was, an endless cycle of pouring yourself out until there was nothing left but the habit of strength. But strength, real strength, was never meant to be a prison. It was never meant to separate you from your own humanity, your own need for tenderness and care. The kind of strength you learned to wear was a beautiful lie, a way of avoiding the terrifying vulnerability of admitting you were not okay, that you needed help, that you were human and fragile and deserving of the same compassion you so freely gave to others. Tonight feels different. There's something in the air, a subtle shift, like the moment before dawn, when the darkness begins to soften at the edges. You find yourself questioning the stories you've told yourself about who you have to be. What if your worth wasn't measured by your usefulness? What if love didn't require you to sacrifice yourself on the altar of everyone else's needs. The questions feel dangerous, like picking at a scab you've protected for years. But there's also something liberating in allowing them to surface. For so long, you've been afraid that if you stopped being strong for everyone, you would discover that you were nothing at all. But what if the opposite were true? What if beneath all that performative strength lay something more precious, your authentic self, tender and real and worthy of love exactly as you are? You've been carrying shadows you didn't know had names, the part of you that feels selfish for wanting something for yourself, the part that feels guilty for being tired, the part that believes you only matter when you're solving someone else's problems. These shadows have been with you so long, they feel like old friends, familiar in their weight and their whispered reminders of who you think you should be. But shadows, when finally seen, lose much of their power. They become what they always were, parts of yourself that got lost in the dark, waiting patiently to be acknowledged and integrated back into the wholeness of who you are. The exhausted part of you isn't weakness. It's wisdom, telling you that you've been running on empty for too long. The part that wants to be cared for isn't selfish. It's human, reminding you that you deserve the same tender attention you've given to countless others. There's a mirror in your bathroom that has watched you rehearse strength for years. Each morning, you've looked into it and adjusted your mask, making sure the edges were secure, that no vulnerability was showing. But tonight, if you were to look into that mirror, you might see something different. Not the person you think you have to be, but the person you actually are. Complex and contradictory, strong and fragile, capable of both holding space for others and needing space to be held. The revelation comes not as a thunderbolt, but as a gentle recognition, the way morning light gradually reveals the landscape that was always there. You are not responsible for fixing everyone's pain. You are not required to be endlessly available, perpetually strong, constantly giving. Your value doesn't decrease when you have nothing left to offer others. Your worthiness doesn't depend on your utility. This understanding feels both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it means dismantling the identity you've built over decades. Liberating because it means you can finally stop pretending that carrying everyone else's weight doesn't hurt your back, that always being the strong one doesn't leave you feeling isolated and unseen. You think about all the times you wanted to cry but smiled instead. All the moments you needed comfort but offered it to someone else instead. All the occasions when you wanted to say, "I can't handle this right now," but said, "Of course, how can I help?" The accumulation of these small betrayals of yourself has created a mountain of unexpressed grief, a reservoir of tears that have never been allowed to fall. What would it look like to honor that grief, to finally give yourself permission to feel the weight you've been carrying, not as a weakness to be overcome, but as a natural response to having taken on more than any one person should bear? There's something sacred in allowing yourself to feel the full extent of your tiredness, your loneliness, your longing to be seen and cared for without having to earn it. The child within you, the one who learned so early that love was conditional on strength, is still there. They've been waiting patiently for someone to notice how hard they've been trying, how much they've sacrificed to be worthy of love. That child deserves to know that they were always worthy, that they never had to earn their place in the world through endless giving, that they are precious simply because they exist. Speaking to that inner child requires a gentleness you may have forgotten how to access. It requires the same tender attention you've given to others' wounded places, the same patient listening you've offered to friends in crisis. But this time, the compassion is turned inward toward the part of you that has been working so hard for so long to be good enough, strong enough, useful enough to deserve love. As you sit in the quiet of your evening, you begin to imagine what it might feel like to set down some of the weight you've been carrying, not abandoning those you care about, but recognizing that you can love people without being responsible for their happiness. You can support others without sacrificing your own well-being. You can be strong without being invulnerable. The image that comes to mind is of a tree that has been growing at an angle for years, bent toward the light, but leaning so far it's forgotten its natural posture. What would it look like to slowly, gently allow yourself to grow straight again, to find your natural posture, the way you were meant to stand in the world before you learned to contort yourself to meet everyone else's needs? This doesn't mean becoming selfish or uncaring. It means becoming integrated, whole, able to give from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. It means recognizing that taking care of yourself isn't a luxury or an indulgence. It's a responsibility, both to yourself and to those you love. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you've been running on empty for far too long. The journey toward wholeness is not a destination, but a practice, a daily choosing of yourself, even when the old patterns whisper that you're being selfish. It's learning to say no without guilt, to ask for help without shame, to admit when you're struggling without feeling like you're failing. It's discovering that vulnerability is not the opposite of strength, but its deepest expression. In the quiet spaces between your thoughts, something is stirring. It's the voice you learned to silence long ago, the one that knew your worth before the world taught you otherwise. This voice has been waiting patiently beneath all the noise of obligation and expectation, holding space for the truth you've been afraid to acknowledge. That you matter, not for what you do, but for who you are. The silencing of this voice didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, like sand slowly covering a shell on the beach. Each time you ignored your own needs to meet someone else's, each time you swallowed your words to keep peace, each time you dimmed your light so others wouldn't feel overshadowed, another grain of sand fell. Over time, your authentic voice became buried so deeply you forgot it was there. But buried things have a way of working their way back to the surface. In quiet moments like this one, when the demands of the day have finally ceased and you're left alone with yourself, you might catch glimpses of that original voice. It sounds different from the one you've been using, softer, more honest, unafraid of its own needs and desires. This voice knows things the performing self has forgotten. It knows that you were born worthy of love, that you don't have to earn your place in the world, that your feelings are valid even when they're inconvenient for others. It knows that rest is not laziness, that boundaries are not cruelty, that caring for yourself is not selfishness, but wisdom. Listening to this voice requires a different kind of courage than the strength you've been practicing. It requires the courage to disappoint people, to let others down, to be imperfect and human and real. It requires the courage to believe that you are enough exactly as you are, without the armor of endless giving and perpetual availability. The armor you've been wearing served a purpose once. It protected you when you were small and vulnerable, when pleasing others felt like the only way to ensure your survival. But you're not small anymore, and the protection that once served you has become a prison, separating you from the very love and connection you've been seeking. Removing this armor is not about suddenly becoming selfish or indifferent to others' pain. It's about recognizing that authentic care comes from a place of choice, not obligation. When you help others because you genuinely want to, not because you feel you have to, your assistance carries a different quality, more present, more sustainable, more genuinely loving. You think about the relationships in your life and wonder how many of them are built on your role as the strong one, the helper, the one who never needs anything in return. What would happen if you showed up differently? If you allowed yourself to be vulnerable, to need support, to be human rather than superhuman? The fear that rises in response to these questions is understandable. If you're not the strong one, who are you? If you're not endlessly giving, will people still want you around? If you're not solving problems and carrying burdens, what value do you bring to the world? These questions reveal the deep conditioning that has shaped your sense of self. Somewhere along the way, you learn to equate your worth with your utility, your lovability with your availability. But this equation is false, built on a foundation of fear rather than truth. You are not valuable because of what you do. You are valuable because of who you are. The process of unlearning these patterns is not about rejecting your caring nature or becoming indifferent to others' struggles. It's about expanding your circle of care to include yourself, recognizing that you are not separate from the human family that deserves love and compassion, but an integral part of it. In the depth of psychological understanding, there exists a recognition that our greatest wounds often point toward our greatest gifts. Your tendency to overgive, to sacrifice yourself for others, speaks to a profound capacity for love and empathy. These are beautiful qualities that the world desperately needs. The wound lies not in having these qualities, but in directing them exclusively outward while withholding them from yourself. The healing involves learning to love yourself with the same fierce tenderness you've always shown others. It means offering yourself the same patience you give to friends who are struggling, the same forgiveness you extend to family members who make mistakes, the same unconditional acceptance you provide to those you care about. This self-love is not narcissism or self-indulgence. It's the foundation from which authentic love flows. When you truly care for yourself, when you honor your own needs and feelings, you have more genuine love to offer others. You're no longer giving from depletion, but from abundance. No longer helping from obligation, but from choice. The night air carries a quality of possibility, as if the darkness itself is holding space for transformation. In this quiet hour, away from the demands and expectations of the day, you have the opportunity to meet yourself with fresh eyes, not as the person you think you should be, but as the person you actually are. Complex, contradictory, beautiful in your imperfection. There's a profound teacher of the human psyche who spent his life exploring the hidden depths of the soul. This wise observer understood that we all carry within us aspects of ourselves that we've learned to reject or hide. Called these rejected parts our shadow, not because they are evil or bad, but because they exist outside the light of our conscious awareness. Your shadow contains not only the parts of yourself you judge as negative, the anger, the neediness, the desire to be cared for, but also positive qualities you've disowned. Perhaps you've hidden your own need for recognition because you learned it was selfish to want appreciation. Maybe you've suppressed your desire for rest because you were taught that worth comes through constant productivity. This great explorer of inner landscapes recognized that wholeness comes not through perfecting ourselves, but through integrating these shadow aspects back into conscious awareness. He understood that what we resist in ourselves doesn't disappear. It simply influences us from the unconscious, often in ways that work against our stated intentions. When you deny your own needs while constantly meeting others, you're suppressed. Neediness doesn't vanish. It emerges in other ways, perhaps through resentment that builds over time, or through passive-aggressive behaviors, or through a subtle martyrdom that makes others feel guilty for receiving your help. The need itself is natural and healthy. The problems arise from pushing it into shadow rather than honoring it directly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, this wise teacher observed, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The unconscious pattern of sacrificing yourself for others' comfort has been directing your life, making you feel like you had no choice but to be strong for everyone. But now, in the growing awareness of this pattern, choice becomes possible again. You can choose to honor your tiredness as information rather than ignoring it as weakness. You can choose to see your need for care as natural rather than shameful. You can choose to value your own well-being as highly as you value others. These choices may feel foreign at first, like learning a new language, but they become more natural with practice. The person you've been, strong, capable, always available, is not someone you need to reject or abandon. They are part of you, and their caring nature is beautiful, but they are not the whole of you. There's also the part that needs rest, the part that has feelings, the part that deserves to receive as much as you give. Integration means making room for all these parts to coexist. In the depth of night, when the world grows quiet and the demands of others fade into silence, you have the opportunity to turn your attention inward, to listen to the voice that's been whispering beneath all the noise. The voice that has been trying to tell you that you matter, not for what you do, but for who you are. This voice has been with you all along, even when it was drowned out by the louder voices that insisted you had to earn your place in the world. It's the voice that remembers your inherent worth, that knows you are deserving of love and care and gentle attention. It's the voice of your deepest self, the part that exists beyond roles and responsibilities and other people's expectations. Learning to hear this voice requires practice, like developing any relationship. It requires quiet moments when you're not solving problems or meeting needs or being useful to anyone. It requires the radical act of simply being with yourself without an agenda, without trying to fix or improve or optimize anything. What if you could trust that you are enough exactly as you are right now? Not when you become stronger or more helpful or less needy, but right now, in your tiredness and your longing and your beautiful imperfection. What if your worth is not something you have to achieve, but something you already possess, woven into the very fabric of your being? The journey towards self-compassion is not about becoming selfish. It's about becoming whole. When you're truly caring for yourself, you have more authentic love to offer others. When you're meeting your own needs, you can support others from a place of fullness rather than depletion. When you're honoring your own humanity, you can see and honor the humanity in others more clearly. This is the paradox that the old pattern couldn't see. Taking care of yourself doesn't make you less caring. It makes you more capable of genuine care. Setting boundaries doesn't make you less loving. It makes your love more sustainable. Honoring your own needs doesn't make you selfish. It makes you a more integrated human being. As you sit with these ideas, you might notice a softening somewhere inside, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. This softening is not weakness. It's the beginning of a different kind of strength. A strength that includes tenderness. A strength that can hold both giving and receiving. A strength that doesn't require you to be anything other than authentically yourself. The child within you who learned to equate love with usefulness is listening to this conversation. They're wondering if it's really safe to stop trying so hard, if they'll still be loved, if they're not constantly proving their worth. This child needs reassurance, not in words, but in actions, in your willingness to finally treat yourself with the kindness you've always deserved. You can speak to this child with the same gentle patience you would offer to any scared, tired child. You can let them know that their worth was never in question, that they don't have to earn love through endless giving, that they are precious simply because they exist. This child has been waiting so long to hear these words, especially from you. The healing that happens when you finally offer yourself this acceptance is profound. It's like coming home after a long journey, like taking off shoes that never quite fit, like breathing deeply after holding your breath for years. It's the relief of finally being allowed to be human, with all the messiness and vulnerability that entails. This doesn't mean you'll never help others or that you'll become indifferent to their struggles. It means you'll help from a place of choice rather than compulsion, from fullness rather than emptiness, from love rather than obligation. It means your strength will become sustainable because it's rooted in self-awareness and self-care rather than self-sacrifice. The great student of human nature wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But on the other side of that terror lies freedom. The freedom to be authentically yourself, to love from a place of wholeness, to give without depleting yourself, to be strong without being invulnerable. The night around you holds space for this transformation. In the darkness, old patterns can dissolve, and new ways of being can emerge. The person you've been is not disappearing. They're being invited to join a larger, more complete version of yourself. The strong one, the helper, the one who cares deeply. They all have a place in this new integration, but they're no longer the only voices at the table. You are more than your strength. You are more than your usefulness. You are more than what you can offer others. You are a complete person worthy of love, care, and gentle attention. This is not something you need to earn or achieve. It's something you can simply accept, like accepting a gift you've always deserved, but never allowed yourself to receive. The path forward is not about dramatic change, but about small, consistent choices to honor yourself. It's about noticing when you're automatically saying yes when you want to say no. It's about pausing to ask yourself what you need before rushing to meet everyone else's needs. It's about treating your own feelings with the same respect you give to others' emotions. Some days, this will feel natural and easy. Other days, it will feel foreign and difficult. Both experiences are part of the journey. Healing is not a straight line, but a spiral, returning to familiar places, but from a higher perspective, with greater wisdom and compassion for yourself. The resistance you may feel to treating yourself with kindness is not your enemy. It's information about how deeply the old patterns are ingrained. You can be curious about this resistance rather than fighting it. What is it trying to protect? What old fears is it guarding against? What would it need to feel safe enough to allow you to be gentle with yourself? In the depth of psychological understanding, there's recognition that our greatest strengths often carry within them the seeds of our greatest challenges. Your extraordinary capacity to care for others became a prison when it excluded caring for yourself. Your ability to be strong became a burden when it meant you could never be vulnerable. Your gift for helping became a source of depletion when it meant you could never ask for help. But these same qualities, when integrated with self-compassion, become sources of authentic power. Your caring nature, when it includes yourself, becomes more sustainable and genuine. Your strength, when it allows for vulnerability, becomes more resilient and real. Your desire to help, when balanced with your own needs, becomes more effective and fulfilling. This is the alchemy of wholeness, not changing who you are, but integrating all the parts of yourself that have been living in exile. The tired part, the needy part, the part that wants to be cared for. These are not flaws to be overcome, but aspects of your humanity to be embraced. As you consider this new relationship with yourself, you might imagine what it would feel like to wake up tomorrow with permission to be authentically yourself, to feel tired without shame, to need support without guilt, to say no without elaborate justifications, to take up space without apologizing for your existence. This permission doesn't come from outside, it comes from within, from your willingness to finally extend to yourself the same unconditional acceptance you've always offered to others. It comes from recognizing that you are not separate from the human family that deserves love and compassion, but an integral part of it. The work of integration is gentle work, requiring patience and persistence, but not force. Like tending a garden, it requires consistent attention, but allows for natural rhythms of growth and rest. Some seasons will be about planting new patterns of self-care. Others will be about weeding out old beliefs that no longer serve you. All seasons are necessary and valuable. You don't have to figure it all out tonight. You don't have to transform completely before sunrise. You just have to be willing to begin, to take one small step toward treating yourself with the kindness you've always deserved. That step might be as simple as taking a deep breath and acknowledging how tired you are. or saying out loud, I matter. 2. The journey of self-compassion is not a destination, but a practice. A daily choosing of yourself, even when the old patterns whisper their familiar refrains. It's learning to hear those whispers with curiosity, rather than conviction, to notice them without being controlled by them, to thank them for their concern while making choices from a deeper place of wisdom. In this moment, in the quiet of your evening, you have the opportunity to begin again, not as someone different, but as yourself, fully, authentically, without apology, the person who has been strong for everyone else can finally learn to be gentle with themselves. The helper can finally accept help. The giver can finally learn to receive. This is not selfish. This is essential. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. This is not giving up on others. This is finally including yourself in the circle of those who deserve your care and attention. As the wise student of the human psyche observed, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. Tonight, you're beginning to look inside, to awaken to the parts of yourself that have been waiting patiently in the shadows, hoping to be seen and accepted and loved. The awakening is gentle, like dawn breaking slowly over a landscape that was always there, but hidden by darkness. You don't have to force it or rush it. You just have to allow it, creating space for it to unfold naturally, trusting that your psyche knows how to heal when given the right conditions. Those conditions include safety, patience, and above all, compassion. The same compassion you've always shown to others in their struggles and pain. You are worthy of that same tender attention, that same gentle understanding, that same willingness to see the beauty in your imperfection and the strength in your vulnerability. The day you stopped being strong for everyone was not the day you became weak. It was the day you became whole, integrating all the parts of yourself that had been living in exile, creating space for a more authentic and sustainable way of being in the world. You are enough. You have always been enough. You don't have to earn your place at the table of human love and acceptance. You were born with a seat reserved just for you. Tonight, finally, you're ready to claim it. There's a particular quality to the silence that surrounds you now, different from the empty quiet that follows a day of giving until you're hollow. This silence is full, pregnant with possibility, holding space for all the parts of yourself that have been waiting to be welcomed home. It's the silence of permission, of acceptance, of finally being allowed to rest. In this fullness, you begin to understand something the wise teacher of depths knew intimately, that the unconscious mind communicates through images, through dreams, through the symbols that arise when we finally stop talking long enough to listen. The image that comes to you now is of a house you've been living in for years, but only using certain rooms. There are doors in this house that you've kept locked, rooms you've avoided entering because you were taught they contain dangerous things: anger, sadness, need, desire, the wild parts of yourself that don't fit into the neat categories of strength and usefulness. But tonight, with trembling hands, you find yourself turning the handle of one of those forbidden doors. The room beyond is not the monster's lair. You expected but a child's bedroom, untouched by time. There are toys scattered on the floor, books left open to pages that tell stories of adventure and wonder. On the bed sits a small figure, yourself at 6 or 8 or 10, waiting patiently for someone to notice that they're tired, that they've been trying so hard to be good, that they just want someone to tuck them in and tell them they're loved. This child doesn't need you to be strong. They need you to be present, to sit beside them and listen to their fears and dreams, to validate their exhaustion and their longing for comfort. They need you to tell them what no adult thought to say when they were actually that age, that their worth doesn't depend on their behavior, that love isn't something they have to earn, that they're allowed to need things. As you sit with this inner child, you realize that every time you've ignored your own needs to meet someone else's, you've been abandoning this young part of yourself. Every time you've pushed through exhaustion to be available for others, you've been telling this child that their tiredness doesn't matter. Every time you've minimized your own pain to focus on someone else's crisis, you've been teaching them that their feelings aren't important. The patterns that feel so entrenched in your adult life begin to make sense when seen through this lens. Of course, you learn to equate love with usefulness. That's what the world taught you when you were small and impressionable. Of course you feel guilty when you rest. Rest was something you were only allowed after everyone else's needs were met. Of course, you struggle to ask for help. Asking for things often led to disappointment or the message that you were being too much. But you're not small anymore. You have the power now to give that inner child what they needed then, but didn't receive. You can offer them the unconditional acceptance, the patient listening, the gentle care that their developing psyche required. This isn't about changing the past. It's about healing the patterns that the past created. The wise explorer of inner territories understood that this kind of inner dialogue is not fantasy, but necessity. He recognized that the parts of ourselves that got wounded or neglected in childhood don't simply disappear. They remain within us, influencing our choices, reactions from the unconscious realm. Healing happens when we bring these parts into conscious relationship, when we finally give them what they needed all along. Speaking to your inner child might feel awkward at first, like learning a new language. You might not know what to say or how to begin, but the child within you isn't looking for perfection. They're looking for presence. They want to know that you see them, that you acknowledge their pain and their longing, that you're willing to sit with them in their vulnerability. You might begin simply with recognition. I see how hard you've been trying. I see how much you've given up to try to earn love. I see how tired you are. The child might not respond immediately. They've been waiting so long that they're not sure it's safe to trust this new voice of compassion. But patience will win them over. The same patience you've always shown to others who were afraid to open their hearts. As this relationship with your inner self deepens, you begin to understand that the strength you've been performing isn't actually strength at all. It's a sophisticated defense mechanism, a way of avoiding the vulnerability of admitting you have needs. Real strength, the kind that's sustainable and authentic, includes the capacity to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to admit when you're struggling. This realization might initially feel destabilizing. If the strength you've built your identity around isn't real strength, then who are you? But this existential crisis is actually an opportunity, the chance to discover who you are beneath all the roles and performances, to meet your authentic self, perhaps for the first time in decades. Your authentic self is not the person who never needs anything, who's always available, who can carry any burden. Your authentic self is a complex, multifaceted being with needs and desires, strengths and vulnerabilities, moments of clarity and periods of confusion. This self is allowed to have bad days, to feel overwhelmed, to need comfort and support. Meeting this authentic self requires what the great teacher called active imagination, the willingness to engage with the parts of your psyche that exist beyond rational thought. It's in the space between sleeping and waking, in the realm of symbols and metaphors, that the deepest healing often occurs. You might imagine yourself as that tree growing crooked, bending so far toward others' needs that you've lost your natural posture. But trees have wisdom. They know how to grow toward the light while staying rooted in the earth. What would it look like to slowly, gently allow yourself to straighten, to grow toward your own light while still maintaining your connection to others? The process of straightening doesn't happen overnight. Trees that have grown at an angle for years need time and support to find their natural posture again. You too might need external support. A therapist, a trusted friend, a spiritual practice to help you learn new patterns of being. There's no shame in needing help to heal patterns that were created when you had no choice but to adapt to survive. The teacher of depths recognized that healing is not an individual process, but a relational one. We are wounded in relationship, and we heal in relationship. This doesn't mean you need others to fix you. It means you need witnesses to your healing, people who can reflect back to you your worth and lovability as you learn to see it for yourself. These healing relationships look different from the ones you've been used to. Instead of being the one who always gives, you learn to receive. Instead of being the one who holds space for others' emotions, you allow others to hold space for yours. Instead of being the strong one, you allow yourself to be the one who sometimes needs strength. This shift in relational dynamics can feel uncomfortable, even scary. What if people don't like this more vulnerable version of you? What if they were only interested in what you could do for them? These fears are understandable, but they often reveal more about your own beliefs, about your worth, than about others' actual responses. Many people will welcome this more authentic version of you. They may have been waiting for permission to drop their own masks, to be more real in the relationship. Your vulnerability often gives others permission to be vulnerable too, creating deeper, more genuine connections than the ones built on your endless giving. Some people, however, might resist this change. They may have become accustomed to you being the strong one, the giver, the one who never needs anything. They might pressure you, consciously or unconsciously, to return to your old role. This is where boundaries become essential, not as walls to keep people out, but as definitions of where you end and others begin. Learning to set boundaries is one of the most challenging aspects of this healing journey. You've spent so long with permeable boundaries, taking on others' emotions and problems as if they were your own, that the idea of saying no feels foreign and frightening. But boundaries are not mean or selfish. They're necessary for your psychological and emotional health. A boundary might be as simple as saying, "I can't talk right now, but let's connect tomorrow." when someone calls during your rest time, or I care about what you're going through, but I'm not in a place to offer advice right now. When someone wants you to solve their problems, these statements acknowledge your care while honoring your own needs. The guilt that rises when you first start setting boundaries is normal and expected. You've been conditioned to believe that your value lies in your availability, so protecting your time and energy feels like betrayal. But this guilt is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something new, something that challenges old patterns. The wise teacher understood that guilt often arises when we're moving from an unconscious pattern to a conscious choice. The guilt is the voice of the old pattern, trying to pull you back into familiar territory. You can acknowledge this guilt without being controlled by it, thanking it for its concern, while continuing to choose yourself. As you practice setting boundaries and honoring your own needs, you begin to discover something surprising. You have more to give when you're giving from choice rather than obligation. When you're rested and cared for, when your own cup is full, your gifts to others come from a place of genuine love rather than unconscious compulsion. This doesn't mean you become less caring or less supportive. It means you become more intentional about your caring, more present when you do offer support, more authentic in your relationships. People can sense the difference between helping that comes from love and helping that comes from obligation. And they often prefer the former even if it's offered less frequently. The journey toward wholeness is not a linear progression, but a spiral dance, circling back to familiar themes, but from new vantage points. There will be days when you slip back into old patterns, when the pull of others' needs feels stronger than your commitment to your own well-being. This is not failure. It's part of the process. Each time you notice yourself falling back into old patterns, you have the opportunity to choose again. You can pause, breathe, and ask yourself what you need. In this moment, you can remember that taking care of yourself is not selfish, but necessary. You can choose to honor your authentic self, even when the old patterns are calling you back to performance. The teacher of inner landscapes knew that this kind of conscious choice-making is what transforms unconscious patterns into conscious ones. Every moment of awareness, every choice to honor your authentic needs weakens the hold of the old patterns and strengthens the new ones you're creating. In the depth of night, when the world sleeps and you find yourself in this liminal space between who you've been and who you're becoming, there's a particular quality of silence that speaks. It's not the empty silence of depletion, but the pregnant silence of possibility. In this silence, you can hear the whispers of parts of yourself that have been waiting decades to be acknowledged. There's the artist who was silenced when you were told that creativity was impractical, that your energy should go toward helping others instead of pursuing your own dreams. There's the dreamer who learned to suppress their visions because someone needed your practical support. There's the philosopher who stopped asking deep questions because everyone wanted quick solutions instead. These aspects of yourself didn't disappear when you learned to prioritize others' needs. They went underground into what the great explorer called the personal unconscious, where they've been waiting with remarkable patience for conditions that would allow them to emerge again. They've been sending you signals all along. The moments when you felt restless, despite being busy, the times when helping others felt hollow, despite their gratitude, the sense that you were living someone else's life. Tonight, in this sacred space between sleeping and waking, these parts of yourself are stirring. They're sensing that perhaps finally it might be safe to show themselves again. They're wondering if you're ready to remember not just your wounds, but your gifts, not just your patterns of sacrifice, but your capacity for joy, not just your strength, but your creativity and wonder. The path to wholeness involves not just healing what was wounded, but also reclaiming what was lost. You are so much more than the person who carries everyone else's burdens. You are a being of depth and complexity, with your own dreams and desires, your own unique perspective on life, your own gifts that are meant to be shared with the world. But sharing these gifts requires a different relationship with yourself than the one you've known. It requires believing that you matter not just for what you can do for others, but for who you are, for the unique combination of experiences and insights and ways of seeing that only you possess. It requires trusting that your dreams are worthy of attention, that your desires deserve consideration, that your voice has something valuable to contribute. This shift from utility to authenticity can feel disorienting at first. When you've spent so long defining yourself by your usefulness, discovering your intrinsic worth feels like learning a new language. But this is your native language, the one you spoke fluently before the world taught you to perform instead of simply being. The child you once were knew this language intuitively. They knew they were worthy of love simply because they existed. They had dreams that seemed possible, desires that felt natural, a sense of themselves as valuable and important simply because they were alive. That knowing is still within you, buried perhaps, but not destroyed. Reconnecting with this original knowing requires a kind of archaeological work, carefully brushing away the layers of conditioning to uncover what was always there. It requires patience and gentleness, the willingness to sit with parts of yourself that might feel foreign after years of neglect. You might begin by asking yourself questions you haven't considered in decades. What did you love to do before you became so focused on what others needed you to do? What dreams did you have before you learned to dismiss them as impractical? What aspects of yourself did you love before you were taught to hide them? These questions might not have immediate answers. The parts of yourself that carry these memories have been in hiding for so long they might not trust that it's safe to emerge. But your patient attention is like sunlight to plants that have been kept in darkness. Gradually, slowly, they'll begin to turn toward this new source of nourishment. As these forgotten aspects of yourself begin to surface, you might experience a mixture of joy and grief. Joy at rediscovering parts of yourself you thought were lost forever. Grief at realizing how long you've been separated from your authentic self, how many years you've spent living a life that wasn't fully your own. This grief is sacred and necessary. It's the psyche's way of acknowledging what was lost, of honoring the sacrifice you made to survive in a world that demanded you be something other than yourself. Allow this grief to flow when it comes. It's not a sign of weakness, but of healing. Not a symptom of depression, but of awakening. The wise teacher understood that mourning what never was is as important as mourning what was lost. You might find yourself grieving the childhood you never had, where your dreams were encouraged instead of dismissed. You might mourn the young adulthood, where you could have explored your own path instead of constantly attending to others. You might grieve the decades of relationships where you were valued for what you gave rather than who you were. This mourning is not about blame or regret, but about recognition. It's about acknowledging the cost of the patterns you adopted, honoring the price you paid to be loved and accepted. It's about creating space for all the feelings that arise when you realize how long you've been living as a stranger to yourself. In the depth of psychological wisdom, there's an understanding that we cannot heal what we do not feel. The emotions you've been avoiding, the anger at being taken for granted, the sadness at feeling unseen, the loneliness of always being the strong one. These are not obstacles to your healing, but pathways to it. Anger, in particular, might be one of the most difficult emotions for you to access. You've been taught that anger is unacceptable, that good people don't get angry, that your job is to absorb others' emotions rather than expressing your own. But anger, when it's acknowledged and honored, is often the emotion that restores your sense of personal power. Your anger might carry important information. It might be telling you about boundaries that were crossed, needs that were ignored, parts of yourself that were dismissed or devalued. It might be the fierce energy that says, I matter too. The force that finally gives you permission to take up space in your own life. Accessing this anger doesn't mean becoming cruel or vindictive. It means allowing yourself to feel the natural response to being overlooked, undervalued, or taken for granted. It means giving yourself permission to care about your own experience as much as you care about others. It means recognizing that you have the right to feel frustrated when your needs are consistently ignored. The sadness that might accompany this anger is equally valid and important. It's the grief of the part of you that has been waiting so long to be seen, to be valued for more than your usefulness, to be loved for who you are, rather than what you do. This sadness honors the loneliness you've carried, the isolation of always being the strong one, the exhaustion of never being able to rest in someone else's care. These emotions, anger, sadness, grief, are not signs that you're becoming self-centered or losing your caring nature. They're signs that you're becoming complete, that you're reclaiming the full range of human feeling that you've been suppressing in service of others' comfort. The integration of these emotions into your conscious awareness is part of what the great teacher meant by making the unconscious conscious. When you acknowledge and honor all of your feelings, they lose their power to control you from the shadows. When you give them space to exist, they can transform from unconscious drivers into conscious choices. As you sit in the quiet of this evening, you might notice that something fundamental is shifting. The quality of your attention is changing from outward focused to inward focused, from constantly monitoring others' needs to finally tuning in to your own inner landscape. This shift might feel selfish at first, but it's actually the beginning of authentic relationship with yourself and ultimately with others. When you're truly present to your own experience, When you're aware of your own feelings and needs, you can engage with others from a place of choice rather than compulsion. You can offer support because you genuinely want to, not because you feel obligated to. You can set boundaries because you understand your own limits, not because you've reached the point of exhaustion. This presence to yourself is not a luxury, but a necessity. It's the foundation from which all authentic action springs. When you know who you are, not just your role or function, but your genuine self, you can make choices that align with your values rather than simply reacting to others' expectations. The process of discovering who you are beneath all the roles you've played is like peeling an onion. Layer after layer of conditioning falls away to reveal what was always there at the core. Some layers might come away easily, like recognizing that you don't actually enjoy being constantly available. Others might be more deeply embedded, like the belief that your worth depends on your usefulness. Each layer that falls away reveals more of your authentic self, your genuine preferences, your real values, your actual desires. You might discover that you prefer quiet evenings to social gatherings, that you're drawn to creative pursuits you've long neglected, that you have strong opinions about things you've never allowed yourself to voice. These discoveries might feel revolutionary after years of defining yourself primarily in relation to others' needs. But they're not new aspects of yourself. They're original aspects that have been waiting patiently for permission to exist again. They're the colors of your authentic self that have been hidden beneath the neutral tones of perpetual availability. The wise explorer of inner territories understood that this process of self-discovery is not narcissistic but necessary. He recognized that individuals who don't know themselves deeply cannot truly love others deeply. Authentic love flows from a place of wholeness, not from a place of emptiness seeking to be filled. When you love from wholeness, your love carries a different quality. It's not possessive or needy but generous and free. It doesn't seek to control or manipulate, but to honor and support. It doesn't require others to be anything other than who they are, because you've learned to accept yourself as you are. This kind of love is what the world desperately needs, not the anxious caregiving that comes from a need to be needed, but the genuine care that flows from a heart that is full rather than empty. Your journey towards self-acceptance is not selfish. It's a gift to everyone whose life you touch. As you consider this new way of being in the world, you might wonder about the practical implications. How do you maintain your relationships while honoring your authentic needs? How do you support others while also supporting yourself? How do you care for people without sacrificing your own well-being? The answers to these questions are not formulaic but situational, requiring the kind of moment-to-moment awareness that comes from being truly present to yourself. Sometimes caring for yourself will mean saying no to a request for help. Sometimes it will mean asking for support when you're the one who usually provides it. Sometimes it will mean admitting that you don't have the answer to someone's problem. These responses might feel uncomfortable at first, especially if people in your life have become accustomed to your constant availability. But your discomfort with disappointing others is not a reliable guide for how to live your life. It's often just the voice of old conditioning trying to pull you back into familiar patterns. The people who truly care about you will adjust to this new version of you, the one who has needs and boundaries and authentic responses rather than automatic compliance. They might even prefer this more genuine version of you, even if it means receiving less of your time and attention. Authentic relationship is built on truth, not on performance. Those who cannot adjust, who insist that you return to your role as the endlessly giving one, might need to be loved from a distance. This doesn't mean cutting them out of your life entirely, but it might mean limiting the amount of energy you invest in relationships that only work when you're sacrificing yourself. This process of relationship evaluation is not about judging others harshly, but about recognizing that not all relationships serve your highest good. Some relationships might have been built entirely on your role as the helper, with little regard for who you are beyond that function. These relationships might need to end or transform significantly for you to maintain your commitment to authenticity. The grief that might accompany the loss or transformation of these relationships is real and valid. It's natural to feel sad when you realize that some people were more interested in what you could do for them than in who you actually are. It's painful to discover that some connections you thought were deep were actually quite shallow. But this grief clears space for relationships that can appreciate your full humanity, your strengths and vulnerabilities, your gifts and limitations, your capacity to give, and your need to receive. These relationships might be fewer in number, but greater in depth, built on mutual respect and genuine care, rather than one-sided service. The teacher of depths recognize that quality relationships are more nourishing than quantity relationships. Understood that a few deep connections where you can be authentically yourself are more valuable than many surface connections where you have to perform a role. As you begin to prioritize authentic relationships over performative ones, you might discover that you have more energy for the connections that truly matter. When you're not depleting yourself trying to be everything to everyone, you can be fully present to the people who see and appreciate your genuine self. This presence is one of the greatest gifts you can offer another person, not your endless availability or your ability to solve their problems, but your authentic attention, your genuine interest in who they are beneath their own masks and performances. When you're no longer hiding your true self, you create space for others to drop their masks as well. The ripple effects of your journey toward authenticity extend far beyond your own life. As you model what it looks like to honor your own needs while still caring for others, you give permission to everyone around you to do the same. Your willingness to be vulnerable encourages others to be vulnerable. Your commitment to truth invites others to drop their pretenses. This is how healing spreads, not through preaching or teaching, but through example, through the quiet revolution of one person choosing to be genuinely themselves in a world that often rewards performance over authenticity. Your journey toward wholeness becomes a lighthouse for others who are tired of living as strangers to themselves. The metaphor of the lighthouse is particularly apt because lighthouses don't chase after ships to guide them. They simply shine their light consistently, allowing those who need guidance to find them. Similarly, your authentic presence doesn't need to actively help or fix anyone. It simply needs to be genuinely itself, creating a beacon of possibility for others who are ready to discover their own authenticity. This shift from active helping to authentic being might feel counterintuitive at first. You've been conditioned to believe that your value lies in what you do for others. So, simply being yourself might feel lazy or selfish. But authentic being is actually the most powerful form of service you can offer. It gives others permission to be themselves as well. The great explorer of psychic depths understood this principle deeply. He knew that the most profound healing happens not when we try to fix others, but when we become whole ourselves. Our wholeness creates a field of possibility that others can enter when they're ready. A space where authenticity is welcomed and honored. As you continue to sit in the quiet of this evening, you might notice that your relationship with silence is changing. Where once silence felt empty or uncomfortable, a space that needed to be filled with activity or availability to others. Now, it feels rich with possibility. In this silence, you can hear the whispers of your authentic self, the dreams that have been waiting, the creativity that has been suppressed. This new relationship with silence is actually a new relationship with yourself. You're learning to enjoy your own company, to find nourishment in solitude, rather than constantly seeking external validation through service to others. Your